Today I want to talk to you all about what to do if solutions don't seem to work. And I've worked with a lot of people who have come to me and have said, I've tried everything and nothing seems to work. I've tried supplements, I've tried therapy, I've tried exercise, I've tried dating coaches. Everything that I do doesn't seem to work, and I'm truly a unique case. And there are a lot of people out there who are always looking to try something new because there's a lot of good stuff out there to try, right? If we kind of look at scientific research, people are researching new compounds, and there are like podcasts and life hacking and biohacking, and even people like myself who are like, oh, hey, you should try this new thing. And so we have so many solutions out there, and it's getting to the point where even if you tried a bunch of them, there's a real problem of, okay, like what do I try next? And if you look at it statistically, there are 1.8 million research articles published every year, and that number is growing. How are you supposed to know which ones work for you? And so this is a very serious problem that a lot of people have and is becoming increasingly important even in the field of medicine. So as we have more and more treatments and more research articles, how do you know what's going to work for you? And this is the challenge with science in general, which is that if you look at science, science is based on populations, right? So if you look at a study on, let's say, omega-3 or fish oil on, let's say, depression, what they'll do is they'll take 1,000 people, half of them omega-3 and half of them nothing, a control, right? And then what they'll discover is that, okay, like there was a 15% improvement. But of the 500 people who took the supplement, it's not that every single person improved by 15%. It's that a third of them improved by 70%, a third of them improved by 30%, and then a third of them improved by 0%, didn't improve at all. And this is what science does. So science is about the law of averages. And so then individuals are left with a serious problem is how do I know which science is going to work for me? And this is precisely why we have clinicians, because sometimes you need another human being to tailor science to your particular perspective, right? To your particular genetics, your particular upbringing, your particular physiology. And so then the question kind of becomes, how do we navigate this problem? And so what I'd love to do today is share with y'all a particular technique that is very, very effective if solutions haven't worked for you so far. Hey there, thanks for watching, and I'm glad these videos have been helpful. A lot of times I'll read the comments and see people asking, well, what do I actually do about it? Which is such a great question. And unfortunately, my experience has been that the resources out there aren't actually that good at helping people create sustainable change, which is why I started HG in the first place. HG coaches are trained on a curriculum that integrates all of my understanding into what is motivation, what paralyzes us, and how to create lasting behavioral change. So if you're ready to take the next step, HG coaches are ready to build the life that you want. They've helped people build careers, find relationships, build networks of friends, discover what their passions are, and pursue their hobbies. So if this sounds like something that you'd be interested in, check out the link in the description below. And so what I'd love to do is share with y'all the technique that I kind of stumbled into that day, but I think is actually better illustrated through the people who sort of discovered it more formally. So there's this test that you have to take to get into med school called the Medical College Admissions Test, at least in the United States. And when I was studying for it, I'd sort of hit a plateau. I was kind of in the top 20 to 25%. And I kept on trying to figure out, okay, what am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? And despite the fact that I kept on looking at my problems and trying to find solutions, it just wasn't working. And then I kind of had this really bizarre idea that seemed a little bit unusual. And I kind of leaned into that. And I found that surprisingly, once I employed this technique or this methodology, I actually bumped up quite a bit. So in order to understand this technique, I'm actually going to go to the original researchers who really sort of fleshed out this technique. And this story actually starts in France with two physicians. So these physicians were focused on public health and specifically malnourishment. And they'd been contracted by the country of Vietnam to improve malnourished children in rural Vietnam. And they had a huge malnourishment problem. Over 50% of kids in this rural section of Vietnam were malnourished and weren't getting enough food. So these physicians did what any good physicians do who are out there to save the world, right? They said, okay, well, like, we will come nourish your children, because how do you fix malnourishment, right? So what do you do if kids are malnourished? You feed them. It's not that complicated. So they show up in Vietnam, and the government has promised them all kinds of stuff. Yeah, we're going to give you this amount of food aid. We're going to give you this amount of money, things like that. And so they show up there. They've taken actually a 1-year break from their day jobs to come and solve world hunger in this rural corner of Vietnam. And the government actually tells them, you know what, we're incredibly sorry, but all that stuff we promised you, none of it's here. Maybe corruption, maybe we overpromised, who knows what happened. Here's what we can give you. We can give you a translator, a van, and some accommodation. Please fix the problem. And so these two doctors are like, well, how are we supposed to solve malnourishment without any food? And the government was like, please try, do what you can. You've come all this way. And then the doctors are like, well, we've dedicated a year to this project and now all the food aid is gone. Let's see what we can do. So they went and they took their van and they took their driver and they kind of drove around for a while and they started exploring this part of Vietnam. And then one of them kind of had a really interesting revelation, which is, well, hold on a second. Like, all these people are poor, right? They're all like rice farmers. That's what like most of them do for their job. And it's not like some of them are super rich or have access to great food. They're actually all in the same situation. They're all rice farmers. And so one of the docs basically asked this question: why isn't the malnourishment 100%, right? Why doesn't everyone have malnourished kids? Everyone's poor, everyone's a rice farmer, but half of the kids are not malnourished. And so they started looking into not the problem, they looked into the people who don't have the problem. And what they essentially discovered was something really interesting, that of the parents of the children who were healthy had a couple of behaviors which the other parents didn't. One is anytime they were out weeding in the rice field, they would see some kinds of like crustaceans, like little shrimps, clams, things like that, right? Because it's like rice paddies. There's lots of water. So there's like little crustacean shrimps and stuff growing in there. They'd have an apron, literally, this is their solution. And anytime they saw a shrimp, they'd scoop it up and stick it in the apron. So they saw a clam or mussel or of any kind, they just scoop it up and stick it in the apron. The other thing that those parents did is that there were certain weeds, so weeds from a rice field perspective, which were actually very nutritious, but are considered poor people's food. So a good example of this in the United States is something like mustard greens, if y'all are familiar with that. So these vegetables are really, really cheap, really good for you, taste a little bit, maybe not as tasty, not as sweet, whatever, and are generally eaten by people who are of low socioeconomic status. So mustard greens, which, and collard greens are another good example, are very like fibrous, right? So collard greens taste delicious if you make them right, but they were traditionally eaten by Africans and slaves. So they're considered poor people food. So similarly, there were some greens that were viewed as poor people food, which half of the families would not eat. They just weed and throw away. But the other half realized, oh, these are edible and nutritious. I'm actually going to eat them and we're going to cook them. And what these researchers essentially discovered is that the reason that half these people are not malnourished is because they do these two things. And so they stumbled on something that they called positive deviance, which is this idea that when there's a problem, you don't actually have to go looking for a solution. A solution already exists, and all you have to do is duplicate it. And so this was kind of a radical and revolutionary idea, because what they actually ended up doing is implementing some behavioral change, and they actually fixed the problem of malnourishment without a single dollar worth of food aid. And so even going back to when I was studying, what I sort of discovered was I started to ask myself, hold on a second. I keep on focusing on the problems that I got wrong, but I'm not asking the questions, why do I get most of these questions right? What is going on in my mind that leads to the right answer, as opposed to just focusing on what leads to the wrong answer? And what I actually discovered was something really interesting, which is that when I took the test, depending on my frame of mind, depending on whether I was paying attention in a particular way, that's what led to the right answers with hard questions sometimes. And instead of focusing on studying physics or biology or chemistry like over and over and over again, oh, I missed this question, that must mean that I need to go back and read the chapter on chemistry. Instead, what I did is sort of applied positive deviance in that situation of studying, and I kind of like actually boosted my score a ton. So we're going to talk a little bit more about positive deviance. And basically what positive deviance suggests is that you actually don't need any solutions. And the right way to improve your life is to not fix your problems. And this is something that is especially ineffective for people who have tried a lot of stuff to fix their problems. And I know it sounds kind of bizarre, but how can I improve my life if I don't fix my problems? It's a subtlety, but it's actually really important, which is that what you need to do is apply positive deviance to your own life. And practically what that means is don't focus on the days that you screw up. Try to duplicate or understand the days that you did really well. And so I'll give you all just an example of like people come to me and they say, hey, I have trouble studying, right? Please evaluate me for ADHD. Give me medication. And then I'll ask them a simple question. I'll ask them, okay, so like, can you never study? And the answer is never no. Yes, I can never study. I cannot study a single day. The answer that I always get is, yeah, like maybe like 1 day out of 15, I do a good job studying. And if you're listening to this video, you know that's true too. You know that there are times in your life where you actually do a really good job, and then you ask yourself, why can't I be like this every day? Right? There's one day that you're super focused, you get everything done on time. You wake up in the morning, you study for 3 hours, you do all your work for the day, and then you're free for the rest of the day. It feels so liberating, feels so good. And then the next day you stumble, you get distracted. And then you ask yourself, okay, how do I stop this distraction? How do I fix that problem? And what positive deviance essentially does is it doesn't focus on the problems, it focuses on the solutions. So what positive deviance is all about is take that one day that you did do a good job and ask yourself, what are the factors that lead to this success? Instead of focusing on all the stuff that knocks you off your game, try to duplicate that which puts you on your game. So practically, how do you do that? It starts with this. So if you have a problem, start by asking yourself, okay, what is one case in which this problem was not applicable, right? So don't worry about the problem itself. Ask yourself, okay, what's one situation where I was able to study? What's one situation where I did make a friend? What's one situation where I was able to set a boundary with someone, right? It can be whatever what's one day that I was able to exercise? What's one day that I was able to eat healthy? What's one day that I ate a sandwich instead of fried chicken or a salad instead of a sandwich? Because each and every human being has some successes in their life. And what positive deviance then does is the problem is that you can get a generic answer from an expert who's a scientist or look at a research study, but the application of that research study isn't going to be 100% because they weren't researching you. All the scientific literature out there is not about you. It's about the average person. And so when you translate stuff from the average person to an individual, there is something that's lost in efficiency. So how do you get that efficiency back? You look at your life and you look at your solutions. You look at your successes. This is the principle of positive deviance. So more practically, start by looking at the days that you actually did really well. And don't worry that it's only 1% of the time or 2% of the time or 3% of the time, because what we're going to do is duplicate the successes instead of trying to fix the failures. That's the key of positive deviance. So then the second question you should ask yourself is, okay, what was going on in the 24 hours prior to this success? So if whatever your target is, let's take exercise, for example. Oh, I woke up one morning and I exercised, right? And then what everyone tries to fix is, oh, I'm lazy. How do I stop being lazy? Forget about being lazy. How are you not lazy that morning, right? Because this is what positive deviance suggests, is that the answer is already there. You don't need to come up with a solution. It already exists. And just like these people who were trying to solve malnourishment in Vietnam, they were trying to fix the problem with 50% of the kids. And instead what they discovered is, hey, 50% of people are doing it right. We just need to duplicate that. And so as you look at the success that you have, let's say you exercised one morning, look at when did you go to bed the night before? What did you eat the day before? What was on your mind? Were you stressed out? Did you play video games? And look at all of the factors that led to that success. So usually what we want to do is a qualitative analysis on our positive deviance. So there's the average, and then there's the deviation that's negative, which is below average, and there's the deviation that's above average. That's what we want to focus on. Then we want to ask ourselves why. And so try to look at as many factors as you can. So stressors, sleep, diet, what you did the day before, and see what led to that success. Then what we want to do is develop a hypothesis and try to duplicate those things again. So instead of focusing on, okay, I need to exercise in the morning, that's not the target that you need to shoot for. What you need to shoot for is, I need to make sure that I do not talk to my friends and log on to Discord after 8 p.m. at night. That's the actual thing that I need to focus on. Because if I can do that, then I'll wake up the next day, I'll feel really good, and then I will actually be able to exercise. So it shifts our target. And then you may say, but that's really hard for me. Or like going to bed on the night before is really hard. Then you can do a positive deviance study on that too. What are the times when you've gone to bed on time? What were the factors that allowed you to go to bed on time? So you want to do a qualitative analysis, develop a hypothesis, and then ideally shift your target and focus on that. And what you'll discover if you kind of do this process, it's an iterative process. So you try it, you see how it goes. Maybe it improves your success a little bit more. And if it improves your success a little bit more, then you ask yourself the question, okay, how was I able to be successful this time? What else did I miss? If you get something wrong, you kind of go back to the drawing board and you can do a second qualitative analysis. You ask yourself, okay, what could I be missing? Or you just continue living your life. And this is the other big part of positive deviance, is that it's not just about fixing a particular problem. Now, what I want you all to do, if you really want to implement positive deviance in your life, is pay attention going forward. This is really important. right? So as you go about your day, you will naturally have some successes. And this time, though, as you have some successes, instead of just thinking, man, I wish I could do this every single day and getting frustrated with yourself by having a failure tomorrow, you're going to pay attention to every aspect of the success. Take notes, generate hypotheses, think about what actually worked for you. Because what positive deviance actually tells us is that if you want to fix your problems, you shouldn't focus on finding a solution to the problem. You should actually duplicate those few times that you actually did do a good job. And then as you start to implement those changes, you'll discover something very, very interesting, which is that fixing the problems that feel unsolvable are actually way easier than you ever anticipated. And you don't need to ask anyone else for help because you've actually fixed them in the past. There have been some successes in the past, and all you need to do is duplicate them.